Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We will begin with a few words by the Minister of Justice, Kaycee Madu, and we will take your questions after that.
Good afternoon. Today, I am proud to announce next steps by the Alberta government in fulfillment of our commitment to keep Albertans safe, to make our justice system better, stronger, and to assert Alberta's jurisdictional authority where it can. I believe that the justice system must reflect the specific needs and concerns of the very Albertans it serves. Albertans must have faith in their justice system to make responsible decisions that are informed by connections to local communities. That is why I am happy to announce the Alberta Parole Board will start operating effective on February 1st this year. A provincial parole board that will be more responsive and reflective of the needs of Albertans seeking justice. Today's announcement is another important step in getting a fair deal for all Albertans. Alberta will now join Ontario and Quebec as the third province to have its own parole board. This step also fulfills the government of Alberta's commitment to ensure parole decisions reflect and better protect Albertans, their loved ones, and their property from repeat offenders, while asserting Alberta's jurisdictional authority. To be clear, the Federal Parole Board will still be responsible for parole decisions relating to inmates in federal institutions. The Alberta Parole Board will now decide on parole for inmates in provincial correctional facilities, that is to say, those sentenced to fewer than 2 years. The newly appointed Alberta Parole Board members are a diverse group whom I am confident have the skills and experience to carry out this important work on behalf of Albertans. The board is independent of government once appointed and the courts, and will review and make parole decisions on a case-by-case basis without external influence. Each parole application will receive fair and balanced consideration based on the information provided to the board members. We have heard time and time again of Albertans in rural communities being victimized multiple times, and that is why we are taking a fulsome approach to address these concerns by establishing the Rapid Response Team to cut down on response times and deter criminal activity in rural Alberta. And now, the Alberta Parole Board can further address those concerns when it encounters repeat offenders seeking parole. I say this again. The Alberta Parole Board will act as a safeguard against repeat offenders targeting families and properties, particularly in our rural communities. Rick Hansen has graciously agreed to act as the chair of the Alberta Parole Board for the next 3 years. Mr. Hansen is, of course, a well-known and respected for his past role as the Chief of Police of the Calgary Police Service and the former Chief Superintendent with the RCMP K Division, and has worked for more than 40 years in law enforcement. We know that Mr. Hansen's experience, skills, and comprehensive understanding of Alberta's communities and risk assessment will be put to good use in this new position. In addition to Mr. Hansen's appointment, 6 other members have been appointed to the board. Randy Anderson, a Northland School Board trustee and manager of Indigenous Relations at North Lake College. Paul Barossa, Director and Vice President of Altia ABM Inc., North America Division. Craig Patterson, lawyer and former chair of Central Alberta Mental Health Review Board. Shirley Takash, Project Manager at Alberta Health Services. Angela Tripathi, Executive Leader and General Counsel, and Lisa Wardley of Mackenzie County Councilor in Zama City. We are fortunate to have such an array of talented people to serve on this board, and I do want to thank them for stepping forward to serve their province. And with that, I turn it over to Mr. Hansen to offer a few words, and then we will take your questions. Thank you. Mr. Hansen?
Thank you very much, Minister. Greatly appreciate your kind words, and we greatly, on behalf of the board, appreciate your confidence in starting the new Alberta Parole Board and making sure that we reflect the values of Albertans in this very vital job. It's a lot of work, and I can tell you that we are firmly committed to taking on this job and making sure that the Parole Board does indeed do what you say, which is reflect the value of Albertans, the values of Albertans.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen. We will now turn to questions. You have one question and one follow-up. Please put through the first caller. Thank you.
Our first question comes from Carly Robinson of the City News. Your line is open.
Hi, I was just hoping you could refresh our memory on the cost of this and the operations and the work that went into starting this up for next Monday.
So thank you for that question. As you know, we have been working on this for some time now with the federal government. We did assemble a group of individuals within my Department of Justice and Solicitor General who have been on this for some time now. And the agreement that we had with the federal government is that we will make this particular transition beginning February the 1st. So I am pleased that we are at the point where we are now in a position to fully launch this particular important board.
Do you have a follow-up?
I'm good, thank you. Not used to follow-up.
Please put through the next question.
Our next question comes from Sarah Comadina of Global. Your line is open.
Hi. You mentioned how this will particularly benefit rural areas. Can you go into more detail on that?
Yeah. So obviously, we have a problem with rural crime in this province. I think it's something that by now every Albertan can agree that that is a problem. We heard that for some time now. And the idea that our communities and our people in rural Alberta don't feel safe in their homes, in their communities, as a consequence of folks, coming back to the community to reoffend, is something that no government should be able to tolerate. And so I think the people of rural Alberta can be sure that we are hearing their concerns. And one of the steps that we have taken to address those concerns, obviously, is making sure that the Parole Board carefully examines all applications to make sure that those considerations are taken into those factors are taken into consideration. And that's why also this government has moved ambitiously to put in place the rapid response team to complement the work that the RCMP does in our rural Alberta. That is also why we put in place the new police funding model, whereby we intend to put more boots on the ground in every corner of our province and certainly in rural Alberta. So I am confident that with this complete, comprehensive approach to dealing with the issue of rural crime and the consistent problem of repeat offenders, the so-called revolving door, I am confident that we would finally get a handle on this problem.
Please put through the next caller.
Our next question comes from Kenny Trenton of Kicks FM.
Yes, thank you for taking my question, Minister. So obviously we've talked before about how much rural crime has been a problem throughout the province, and I guess exciting news up here that you've appointed a member from Mackenzie County Council right up here in the northwest to the Parole Board. In talking about that, how important is it to hear from those rural voices who see crime, as you know, in a much different way than maybe they would in urban centers?
Thank you, Kenny. That is extremely important to me and to this government. If you recall, Kenny, my predecessor, Minister Schweizer, embarked on a rural tour to hear firsthand, the concerns from rural residents. And at every turn, Minister Schweizer would have, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people participating in those town halls. And I think one of the things we heard loud and clear is that the issue of rural crime is real, and one that they want their government to focus on and to fix. So it is important to me that we have members in this particular board, on this board, that brings to the board the experiences of all of our rural communities and residents. And that is why I have carefully chosen the members of this particular board that cut across every part of our province, but more importantly, folks that live, work, and raise their families in our rural communities.
Thank you, Kenny. Please put through the next caller.
Our next question comes from Janet French, CBC.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my questions. I have a question for Mr. Hansen and for Minister Madu. Minister, earlier you'd said that you thought that this parole board was going to cost about $600,000 a year. I'm curious if you're still on budget for that. And also, you had said at the time that you were going to try and get the federal government to pay for some of the cost. Were you successful in securing any federal funding for the operation of this board? And for Mr. Hansen, you'd mentioned that you wanted this board to reflect Alberta values and priorities. How do you think its approach is going to be different in Alberta from the National Parole Board?
So thank you, Janet. Our projection for the fiscal year 2021-2022, the setup cost to the provincial government is about $510,000. So the estimated annual operating cost is $682,000. So to your question, we are on budget. To the latter part of your question as to whether or not the federal government is going to help with funding the parole board, those conversations are still ongoing. It is certainly my hope that the federal government would understand that we are taking steps to protect our province, and that this ought to be a partnership, even though we have exercised our jurisdictional authority as laid out in the law. So, the nutshell is that those conversations around federal government participation in the funding is still ongoing. Mr. Hansen, please.
And in answer, yes, thank you. And in answer to your question, I think that the minister, through the appointments and through what he has said, has made it really clear that what's really important is that the parole board is a vital part of community crime and safety and how that is managed. And having community input from the various areas of the province, I think, is vital. So if you're asking what is going to be the difference between the federal parole board and the provincial parole board, is the representation from the various parts of the province from people who have input into who is being released, when they're being released, how does that impact crime in their community, those types of things. And that type of involvement from various communities around Alberta is one thing that is, I think, significantly different from the federal parole board.
Please put through the next caller.
Our next question comes from Audrey Niva of Radio Canada.
Hi, Mr. Madu. Thank you very much for taking my question. This parole board for Alberta was a recommendation of the Fair Deal panel. So can you please go over the reasons why an Alberta parole board would be more beneficial than sticking with the Canada one?
Well, thank you, Audrey, for your question. I think it's important that any government pays attention to the aspirations of their people. And as you rightly noted, through the Fair Deal panel, we heard it loud and clear from Albertans, especially those in rural Alberta within the criminal justice system, making the request to have an Alberta parole board. And so we heard them loud and clear, and that is why today I am very, very proud of this announcement. That said, you know, they needed to have an Alberta Parole Board to deal with sentences 2 years and below are critical, because oftentimes we've heard from folks in our communities, and they needed to have members of this particular board that are very familiar with our local circumstances, that are very familiar of the real concerns with respect to rural crime, with respect to repeat offenders, and the problem of revolving door. And so, you know, oftentimes, you know, whilst I have ultimate respect to the Federal Parole Board that have dealt with these matters up until this point in time, it was important that we answer the call of our people to appoint people on that particular board that are familiar with our province, the problems in our rural communities, and the problem with crime all over our province. So I think that is why we have stepped forward to put in place this particular board.
That concludes today's announcement. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.